Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Today I have part 1 of a 2-part workshop for how to turn molten stamped soldered components into pieces of jewelry. Now if you haven't seen my previous video, DIY molten stamped low temp soldered jewelry tutorial, be sure to check that out first so you can see how we make these beautiful components. And if you're new to my channel, welcome. I'm Laura Beth Love and I'm an artist and Penguin Random House author who works in all types of creative media. And I'm an expert in low temp soldering. Let's get started. The first project I'm going to show you, we're going to use a piece of vintage tin. Now, I've already started with a piece of wire that I've shaped into a teardrop. I have tinned it with solder, and if you don't know how to do that, like I said, go back to that first video and then pick it up here. So what I'm doing is I'm going to use tin snips that I got at a craft store, and I'm going to cut out the shape that I'm going to put behind one of my wire teardrops. So simple enough, I'm going to hold the tin up against the back of the teardrop, and then I'm going to use the tin snips to cut away. So I'm just going to snip one direction and then the other. It's pretty self-explanatory. You have to be careful. This tin can be sharp. You might want to wear gloves when you use it. As always, when you're working with any kind of chemicals or heat or sharp objects, make sure you're always wearing safety glasses and that you have those kind of protective things in your workspace. So now that I've figured out where I want to position my piece of tin, I'm going to use those tin snips and I'm going to snip around the edges. It doesn't have to be perfectly exact because what we're going to do is we're going to solder the tin to the wire frame, and then after that's done, then we're going to add our decorative stamped edging. Now that we have the shape of our tin piece cut out, we're going to move over to our soldering station and we're going to put a coating of solder just around the edges of the piece of tin, and that's going to help it adhere to our wire frame. So I used a generic liquid stained glass flux and the flux brush, and I applied that around to the edges of the piece we cut out. And as you can see, I'm just picking up a little bit of lead-free solder. We always use lead-free solder for jewelry making. And I am applying that around the edges. And, you know, it's just basically picking up a little bit and we're just going to run it down the side, you know. And then, like I said, you know, you see there's a little bit of fumes coming up there, a little bit of smoke. Make sure you're working in a well-ventilated area. Okay, so here's how our piece looks. It's pretty cool already. And that's made from a really old piece of tin, like a biscuit tin, and it's been flattened out and hammered out, and so it's not a brand new piece. It is, you know, a vintage old item. A lot of people make tin jewelry. It's really cool, and I have a lot of those tins, and I thought I would add a piece for this project. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to attach the two pieces together now, and you can see that I tried to hold it against there in the right position, and using those soldering pliers, which are pliers that I keep on my soldering station, and I only use them for soldering. And I'm going to be turning it, and I'm going to apply a little bit more flux around the edges in the back, and I'm going to just pick up small pieces of solder and melt that on. And we're going to try to fill that gap that's between the back plate of the tin and the wire of the front piece. So, you know, you want to not keep the iron on there for too long. We're going to try not to damage the tin part, the painting on it. It will come up if we put too much, you know, heat or too many chemicals on it. So you do have to be a little bit careful. You don't want to just flood the whole thing with that liquid flux. So we're just about finished with that. There's a couple gaps, and I'm just going to fill those in with solder. And, you know, this is handcrafted organic jewelry. Nothing about it is precise and exact. It should have that handcrafted look and feel, and we're going to make it as beautiful as we can. And it still has a really cool rustic look and feel to it. So as we finish up those edges, you can see this is how it turned out. And I'm going to put a little bit more flux in the front, and you're going to see what happens here. It accidentally takes off some of the design, but later on in the video I'm going to show you how I repair that, how I remedy that. And what we're going to do now is we're going to start our stamped edging, and I'm taking larger globs of solder and I'm just melting them off the spool and I'm placing them around the wire frame. So we have our tinned piece of tin that we attached to the wire frame, and now we're putting blobs of solder around it. And I'm going to get my red rubber stamp. And again, if you don't know this technique, please watch the other video that teaches you the basics because I explain it all in there. And I'm going to hold my soldering iron tip against the end of that to make it molten, and I'm going to quickly stamp that. I use a little bit of a rocking motion so I can kind of guide the direction of the solder the way I like it. And I'm just going to travel around the whole piece, doing that where I like. And I keep doing it until I'm happy with it. Now, if there's a stamped part that doesn't turn out the way that I would have liked, I'll redo it. I'll just melt that solder and I'll, take some away, or sometimes I need a little bit more, I'll add some more, and then I'll just stamp it over again. So you can see that we're working around, and I have some larger areas at the bottom, and I'm just going to continue to stamp. You want to be careful. It does, your project does get hot. So, there you can see some of that paint starting to come off. So I'm going to show you how we fix that now. I washed the piece and let's move on. Okay, so now we're going to work on repairing this piece that I put too much heat and chemicals to, and it started to make the paint come off. And you can see how it scratched off the back a little bit, but one of the remedies we can do for that is we can leave it as it is. Maybe put some kind of protective coating on it, or we can cover it up. And the way we're going to do that is I'm going to use a gold paint or a gold leaf. Now you can buy actual real gold leaf, which looks like this. Now I use this for more of my kind of refiner jewelry, and this is how it comes. And it looks like this inside, and each little sheet is like between tissue paper, and it's very, very thin, and it's very hard to work with. Until you get the hang of it, you might want to practice with, they have gold colored metal leaf, they call it. You can get that at craft stores. You can get it in different types of colors. Like you can get the gold, you can get like rose gold, you can get silver, maybe copper colored. So that's one option. Okay, the next option is using some kind of a powder. Like you might have this kind of powder at home. This is Pearl X Aztec Gold. I thought I'd go with a gold because there's some nice gold in the background design. So there's that. And of course you would have to apply that on top of something, so you'd have to put down some kind of adhesive. And that's what you do with the gold leaf too, by the way. It's a two-part thing. It's not just putting leaf down. The leaf has to stick onto something. So there is gold leaf adhesive you can use. You might be able to use something like an Elmer's glue, watered down, very thin, and it can't be wet, it can't be heavy or thick. It needs to just be very tacky. So that's how that's used. And another option is to use a gold paint. You can use like a gold acrylic paint. I have this. This is called Liquid Leaf Classic Gold, and this is kind of the stuff that comes in those, you ever see those paint pens? So let's take a look at this. It's super shimmery. Okay, so I'm going to use that, and I'm actually probably can just work right out of the lid. See how much I have in there. Oh, maybe a little bit more. So I'm just going to dip into there. And then I'm going to go closer up for so you can see. And I'm just going to apply some in some areas on here. And I'm just going to kind of dance the brush around. I'm not really, doing anything in any special way. Just dotting it on here and there. And I went over the area where the like the design was removed, but I also went over the edge so it doesn't peel off anymore. And I just did that. I got a little bit of a bubble there, but so yeah, I think that's a pretty good remedy to that. And I was disappointed to lose some of that design, but I mean, even before I used it, it had, wear on it. It's from an old can, an old tin can. So what you want to do next is you want to certainly clean off your brush. So you want to wipe that right away. Wash it off. If you need to use a solvent to clean it, do that. Keep this lidded. If you do use this, it does tend to glue the lid to the bottle. So I find that you want to keep, wiping the bottle before you put the lid back on. Maybe put a little bit of Vaseline on the screw part of the jar. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're just going to let that dry. Set it aside and let it dry, and we're going to move on to our next technique. In my last video, we learned how to make these stamped soldered components, and I promised you that I was going to show you how you can turn these into jewelry. So here are the ones that we made last time, and you know, it's basically like the technique that I just showed you again in review. And the idea here is to extend the stamped soldered area outside of the wire frame far enough so that you are able to drill a hole into it or punch a hole into it to add on either a beaded drop, a loop to attach maybe a jump ring, or you know, some sort of jump ring that attaches into a bail. And I'm going to show you how I did that. So again, just like we did the last ones, here's a silver. These are just the same, they just have the patina on them, which if you haven't seen, make sure you watch the first video of making stamped soldered components. Okay, so here's one that I extended. You can see here at the top of this first one, you know, I put a blob in there, and you know, the wire ends meet there, so you don't really, you know, probably want to drill in there. You need more of a area. So for this one, you can see that I really, you know, extended that solder on the top, and then all you have to do is use a small drill bit and drill a hole through there. Now make sure that your jump ring size will fit through your hole. And let's see the next one I did. Here's one of the circle components, and this one's cool in that it can either be drilled this way and you can hang like a beaded drop through it, or you could put it this way and make a hole through it there, and then you can hang some type of bail in there. Another idea that you can do with these is to form the wire in a way like this. And what I did was, instead of making the teardrop shape and bringing the two ends of the wire to the top and then soldering the entire thing, therefore I soldered the ends of the wire together, for this one I made the teardrop shape, but as you can see I can open that up. Okay, so what I did was I started with the wire here, I went down into the teardrop, and then I kept this end long, and I used my pliers and I bent the end of the wire into a loop. Let's see if I can get it closer up for you. Here you go. And that's what it looks like. There's the back, and there's the front. And what you can do is you can use this to, let's say you want to hook on, you know, some other kind of component, and then, you know, you can do it that way, and then you can just close that up. Now, I'm not too crazy about using this technique for the reason that it's not super sturdy. You know, this is copper wire, and it is bendable yet. So I do prefer to have it completely soldered, but it's another idea. And like I always say, use my techniques and the things I show you as a springboard for your own imagination, and see where it takes you. So here's another one that we made last time, I believe. And this one I do have the solder mostly in the inside of it. And there's even a hole here where I did it, you know, pretty thin. I didn't really have a lot of, or the design on the rubber stamp pushed down hard through that solder, but you know, nonetheless, it's still beautiful. So now that you have that idea, let's move on to the next part. Okay, so for a demonstration on how to drill the hole, you're going to need some small drill bits. I have two, one's finer than the other. And if you have a flex shaft tool, you can use that. Or you can use a regular hand drill, which is what I'll show you. Now, the soldered area of this project is relatively thin, so you don't have to press hard. Always use the weight of the drill to drill a hole. You don't ever press hard. And I'm going to show you how we do that. So I have this bit into my good old just household hand drill, and you're going to, of course, always drill on a wood block. I usually have this into my vice grip on my bench, but for the purpose of doing this video and showing you easily, I'm just going to do it right here on this workspace. So I'm going to find a spot where I want to drill my hole. I don't want to put it too high up because then I'll have all this stuff in the way of anything that I'm going to hang from it. So I'm going to try to go to the end of it, and you can drill it through the front side or you can drill it through the back side. And that's actually what I'm going to do because I see it's a little bit more smooth here. So I'm going to try to find a spot. And you know, if you goof it up, you can always resolder it again. You know, you can always start over. A little hole right here. went through very easily. Okay, check it out. Yes, there's a hole. Okay, so let's do the other one. Again, I think I'll do it through the back. Because positioning the drill, it's textured. You know, you have all these bumps and lumps, and unless you can find one that you can go into that's pretty easily, you know, accessible, do it this way. So I'm going to try to measure it kind of close to the edge, not too close. I don't want to ruin my design. And then I'm just going to drill that right there. Moved a little bit. I'm trying to do it so you can also see at the same time. There we go. Alright. Now we want to reverse our drill. That one doesn't want to come off. Okay, so here's our second one. Nice. So now you have another technique that you can use. By easily drilling a hole in it. And you know, you can do that either like now before you put a patina on, or if you're going to put a patina on and then you decide or you forget to drill a hole, you can do it after. It doesn't matter. Now let me show you another technique. Once you have your hole drilled into your soldered component, you can add a jump ring. And this one is a 5.5 millimeter jump ring. And the way that we open this is by using 2 pairs of pliers. I'll use 1 pair of plier. First of all, you want to find where the ring splits. And you're going to hold it with 1 pair of plier on one side of the split at the very top there. And then I'm going to take a second pair of pliers and I'm going to grab it on the other side. And I'm going to pull 1 pair of pliers toward me and the other away from me. So like this. And there it is. And then we're just going to thread it right through the hole on our component. Like that. And then as the way we opened it, we're going to do the same to close it. So I'm going to grab one end and the other and kind of snap it closed. Sometimes you'll hear a nice snapping sound. And that's that. Now you have a jump ring on your component and you can use that to thread a cord through or a ribbon or a chain and hang your pendant. Another thing that we can do with our frames is we can add a color finish to them. Now these are the vintage patinas, and of course my favorite is the verdigris. And then there's jade, there's moss, there's agate, there's onyx, and I have ochre. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put down just a piece of plasticky paper as a surface so it doesn't get all over the wood. And we're going to use a brush, like the same kind of brush I used when I applied the gold earlier. And we're just going to like kind of blot some of this around. So let's try this one. Give you a better view. So you're going to shake this bottle up. It has a bead in it, so you know it really needs to be mixed just like a spray paint. So I'm going to give that a shake. And then you can put it like on your paper and then use that like as a palette to paint around, or you can drip it right directly onto your metal, but I'm not going to do that. And you also want to keep a paper towel or a tissue close by so you can wipe that off before you put the lid back on. I find them to be a little bit drippy. It's very thin. So let's just dip into some of this and then just kind of brush that on. And you know, the thing of this is you're supposed to brush it on and then you kind of buff it out. So you can layer these colors. Like you could do black first and then wipe it so the black's only in, kind of like when we do our chemical patina. And then after the black is dry, you can like just kind of brush over it. See when you do brush it lightly like that, how it only goes on the top parts that stick up from the stamp. It doesn't get into all the little crevices. So you want to use your brush and get in there. But that's another effect that you can do. So I'm just going over this a little bit here and here. And then you want to flip it over. And you want to also give it some color on the reverse side. You want it to completely, you know, have color. May need to pour a little bit more out for that, but just to show you for the video, that's enough. So you can let it dry for a little bit, or like I said, you can buff it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold it with one hand, and I'm just going to kind of wipe it off with another so I can see some of that silver through. That way the color is down in the recessed areas. So to give you an idea, there you have it. That's really pretty. What a beautiful color. I think that's one of my favorite colors. So let's try another one. Let's try the black on this one. And we're going to put some of the black into the recessed areas on this one. So we're going to do the black first. And then we'll put a color on top of it. All right, so let's dip into our black. And let's scrub it in. I'm going to hold it with a tissue because I don't want to get too much of it all over my hands because I didn't put gloves on. There we go. And let's flip that over and just kind of color up the back a little bit. I don't think I have to pour any more paint out. So yeah, just a little drip was fine. Get the edges inside and out. And there you have it. So my paintbrush is kind of funny. All right. So now we're going to wipe some of that down. You can use a cloth. Probably a cloth is a better idea than a tissue because the tissue kind of comes apart, as you can see. Let's take a look here. But yeah. Okay, so here was our first step. So there's black in there. So now let's put on a color. I'm going back to the verdigris because I can't get enough. All right, so we have some of that. Now let's take this, and I'm not going to scrub it in this time. I'm just going to gently brush over the top a little bit. This stamping on this one isn't too recessed. And then I'm just going to kind of blot it off and wipe it a little bit. So it has that vintage look to it. You don't want it to look really, you know, painted. And let me get a piece of cloth because I think that's going to look a little easier. So let's take this here and then kind of just buff it down. And I think it pretty well dried already. And I forgot to go over the back with green, but that's okay. And then they do have a buffing pad. This is basically, this is just like the blocks that you get for your nails at any kind of beauty store like Sally Beauty. They're used, I think, for people who use acrylic nails to like buff them down. But there are different grits on here, like very, very fine. And then you see that the glittery one is coarser because you can actually see that grit on there. So let's just hold it in our hand and just wipe it a little bit. Let's see how that goes. Okay, that's an interesting finish, and let's hold it up to our one that we did before so you can see the difference. They're dry already. So what you want to do is you want to put a protective coating on this. And they do sell one that goes along with their patinas like this, the glaze. What you can do is you can use any kind of acrylic craft spray. You can also use resin. Love resin. And there's two beautiful, beautiful components that you can add beads to. And you know, I always say to my daughter when we go to the craft store or bead store, don't let me buy any blue or green beads, especially green beads, because I am just drawn to them. I don't know what it is, but I have so many green varieties of beads that it's crazy. But aren't these pretty? And let me get out a bead box and I'll show you what I mean about how we match those up. Here, I'll show you two of my boxes. This one is greens, and this is how I store my beads. These are all stone beads. So I would just open my bead box like this, and I take it and I just, go over and say, oh, like what really goes with that? Ooh, I like that. What looks really pretty with this. And then here's a box of blues I can show you. Kind of blues and blue greens, turquoises, that kind of thing. So it doesn't have to match. What you want to do is you want to use just a little bit of that color of one of the colors you see in there. And you want to, pull that color out by using another color bead. So I really wouldn't use like this bright turquoise bead with this. I might use something dark with this, a darker kind of bead, or something like this is Peruvian opal. Look how pretty that is. Something like that. And then here's our darker one. So yeah, so you want to match your beads up that way. Okay, so now I've showed you 3 ways that you can transform these stamped soldered components into jewelry findings. But I still have more to show you, and I saved the best for last. In part 2 of this video, we are going to get a bit more artsy and a little bit more advanced when I show you how to really make these stamped soldered components sing. I'll show you how to add wire and beads to create a colorful cathedral effect, and then I'll show you how you can use vintage images and old book pages along with some resin for a fabulous technique that you don't want to miss. Now, I've already filmed part 2 of this video series, and I'll have that up for you tomorrow, so be sure to check back so you can see the second half of this workshop. And in the meantime, thanks for joining me, and I hope that you enjoyed this video, and if you did, give it a thumbs up and be sure to check out my books, Boho Chic Jewelry and Soldered Alchemy. And as always, if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to my channel and make sure to hit the little bell that's next to subscribe so that you can get notified when I release a new video. See you next time!